We begin with the New York City mayoral race, where Zohran Mamdani continues to build momentum with Democratic endorsements.
That headline, MSNBC just destroyed Zohran Mamdani, captures a moment in New York City politics where the progressive momentum surrounding Zohran Mamdani collided with harsh scrutiny from mainstream media. On MSNBC, during a segment focused on housing and accountability, commentators zeroed in on Mamdani's own living situation, a rent-stabilized apartment in a city where housing affordability is a daily crisis for many. The line of attack was clear. How can someone campaigning on affordability for the many continue to live under policies and benefits that some argue are reserved for those with lower income? The critique wasn't just about policy, but ran into the realm of perceived credibility, hypocrisy, optics, the kind of vulnerability political narratives can't easily absorb. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The outrage centers first on what rent stabilization in New York really means. For those unfamiliar, rent-stabilized apartments are units that, under law, limit how much landlords can raise rents each year. For many tenants, especially in neighborhoods with skyrocketing real estate markets, they are a lifeline. Critics argue these regulations shield tenants from displacement and provide predictability in living costs. At the same time, there's a built-in tension. As incomes of individual tenants rise, the moral weight of benefiting from a subsidized housing status when one earns significantly more than others comes under scrutiny. That's where Mamdani's critics landed during the MSNBC debate. They claimed that his income level makes it difficult to defend both his advocacy on housing affordability and his sustained personal benefit from a rent-stabilized unit. What makes this especially potent is Mamdani's public persona. He emerged to wide attention as a democratic socialist who frames his platform around economic justice, income inequality, access to housing, and universal services, buses, groceries, childcare. His identity as someone who understands the struggle is part of the appeal. When MSNBC panelists contrasted his messaging about rent stabilization and affordable housing crisis in New York with the fact that he lives in one of those apartments and arguably benefits from its protections while running a campaign funded in part by wealthier donors, that struck critics as undermining his message. The attack is not simply on policy detail, but on perceived authenticity, trust, and whether his lived experience matches the demands he puts on the system. On one side, defenders argued that the timing of when he secured that apartment matters. Mamdani apparently got into it before his political rise, when his income would have made that apartment more defensible on eligibility grounds. It wasn't something he obtained in the midst of running for office, they say. Also, being in a rent-stabilized apartment is not illegal or illegitimate. Many New Yorkers live in such units, even those whose incomes increase over time. The issue becomes political more than legal. Optics, perception, fairness. Mamdani's defenders on the panel noted that criticizing someone's housing status is often a veiled attack on the economic inequality they are trying to highlight, that the cost of rent, the gap between rents and wages, is what most New Yorkers struggle with, and those larger forces shouldn't be ignored because one candidate happens to still live in a stabilized apartment. What MSNBC destroyed in the framing of critics is Mamdani's rhetorical shield, the idea that he is unflinchingly consistent, that his leadership is free of contradictions. The pushback on MSNBC didn't merely say, "Here's a point of disagreement about policy." It said, "You are making one kind of claim to solidarity, but your personal situation complicates that claim, and no politician wants to have that claim complicated in front of a wide audience, especially not someone running on radical change." The pressure is acute. If voters believe that someone is benefiting from the very inequities they want to eliminate, trust erodes, and the political vulnerability increases. But the critique isn't universally accepted as fair. Some observers see the MSNBC moment as another attempt to delegitimize progressive candidates by holding them to standards not usually applied to others. They note that many politicians have ties to systems of privilege, whether property, family, wealth, position, and yet aren't subjected to the same level of scrutiny. When Manny advocates for rent stabilization, he argues that this institution itself is imperfect, underregulated, under threat, and that structural change is needed. That being in a stabilized unit doesn't automatically disqualify one's ability to critique the housing market, especially when the alternative is living in market rate or unaffordable housing, which may make activism difficult or impossible. Another layer of complexity is how media frames these kinds of stories. The word destroyed or got him carries a particular singular connotation, not just of critique, but of humiliation, defeat. In panels like those on MSNBC, where one or more commentators are positioned to challenge, the adversarial tone is built in, so even when the substance of critique may be valid, the framing can make it feel like an attack rather than constructive questioning. For many viewers, the damage done is less about policy and more about character. Zohran Mamdani's situation raises interesting questions about what voters expect. Is it authenticity? Transparency, purity. Many progressive candidates are already navigating the tension between trying to live by their politics versus using what advantages or opportunities they may have. If candidate A opposes high rents, is it disqualifying if they once used a stabilized rent? Is it required that they give up benefits when they gain wealth? Or is that kind of moral perfectionism unreasonable, especially in a system where opportunities for many are already so uneven? The MSNBC fallout seems to suggest that Mamdani needs to clarify not just what he believes, but what he has done, when, and under what condition. It isn't enough to say, I experienced something that many New Yorkers experience. People will ask, when did you move into your apartment? What is your income then versus now? How long will you remain there? Have you considered stepping away from a unit like that? How much rent are you actually paying relative to market? That level of detail can make the difference between being seen as transparently honest versus evasive, or worse, hypocritical. It also reflects the broader battleground in the 2025 NYC mayoral race. Housing affordability is arguably the defining issue. Rents, housing supply, cost of living, infrastructure, transportation. Progressive candidates like Mamdani are pushing bold solutions, but those solutions run into systems built over decades. Landlord laws, market forces, zoning, state preemption. And that means every element of their lives becomes scrutinized. If you argue for rent freezes, people will ask whether you're paying a freeze. If you call for higher taxes, people want to know whether you're shielding yourself from them. The smaller the detail, the larger the potential exposure. What MSNBC did may not destroy Mamdani's candidacy, no one moment usually does, but what it highlights is how difficult it is for a politician to maintain the kind of purity that progressive politics often demand. It shows the risk of personal narrative being weaponized in political debates, especially when the stakes are high. It's a reminder that every personal detail becomes fair game, and opponents will use those details aggressively, especially when they believe they have a wedge issue. Depending on Mamdani's response, this could either be a moment of resilience or damage. If he responds with clarity, acknowledges complex realities, and shows consistency, it may help rebuild credibility. If he avoids addressing the specifics, why he is still living where he is, what his commitment will be to affordability beyond rhetoric, then the line "destroyed" may linger in political discourse. The damage is seldom absolute, but narratives grow, especially when amplified by media framing, social media, and opponent messaging. In that sense, MSNBC didn't just destroy Zohran Mamdani by calling him out. They forced him into a moment of reckoning. They turned what may have been a subtle vulnerability into a full-scale question of legitimacy. And in politics, sometimes exposed vulnerability becomes the story, not the ambitious agenda. Whether that becomes a permanent drag or a chance to deepen trust depends on how Mamdani handles the fallout. What makes this moment especially revealing is the way it underscores how political battles are increasingly fought not only over policy proposals, but over the personal lives of those proposing them. In the case of Zohran Mamdani, the MSNBC segment didn't dispute his legislative ideas directly. It questioned whether his private circumstances allowed him to embody the struggle he so passionately articulates. That shift in focus tells us a lot about contemporary politics, where narratives of integrity and authenticity carry as much weight as bills introduced or votes cast. For a politician who has built his reputation on representing marginalized communities, the perception of inconsistency can be more damaging than a straightforward ideological disagreement. This also brings into focus the role of national media in shaping local campaign. A segment on a cable network can reverberate far beyond its initial broadcast, finding new life on social media platforms, where clips circulate stripped of nuance and reinterpreted by countless voices. Suddenly, what may have been a 10-minute discussion becomes a defining episode, replayed across timelines and feeds. The challenge for Mamdani, then, is not simply to withstand the criticism, but to seize control of the narrative before it hardens into a permanent impression. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on MSNBC just destroyed Zohran Mamdani? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.